Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you all here today. I thank you for being here, and I thank you for your practice this morning. We're going to be talking this morning a little bit about the parts of ourselves, the parts of our hearts, the parts of our lives that are destructible, and the parts of ourselves, the parts of our lives and our practice that are not. And in traditional Buddhist fashion, as many of you know, usually the Buddhist Dharma talk starts with either a reference to scripture, a sutra, or traditionally starts with a reference to Rolling Stone magazine review of a rock album. Those are usually the two traditional entryways into Dharma. I'm choosing the latter of the two. So here's where we're starting today. Before I start with my Rolling Stone review of the rock album, as we were sitting together this morning, as we were sitting zazen just now, my favorite two lines from Lu Ku's famous poem, Lu Ku, the Chinese poet from, I think, the 7th century in China. My memory is not great, so I might be wrong. Many of you who've heard me talk have heard me quote it because I quote it with frequency. And it's on my mind a lot, as I'm sure everybody's mind is on the changing landscape of our country, the changing landscape of our world. And Lu Ku's two lines speak very eloquently to something he would have encountered in, again, I think 7th century China as he watched an empire fall at that time in that country and the violence that comes with that. And his two lines are, the nation is destroyed, mountains and rivers remain. It was part of a much longer piece, those two lines. The nation is destroyed, mountains and rivers remain is kind of the inspiration. For this talk, I've spoken on those two lines either directly or indirectly, I don't know, probably a dozen times in the last few years. Again, I hope for what I expect are pretty obvious reasons. But there is in the meditative experience, there is in the contemplative path, an invitation to begin to experience, not only just understand with the mind, but to actually begin to experience a felt sense of that which is transitory and that which is not. And I'm not talking about impermanence in the usual sense. That's not what I mean by destructible and indestructible. But we begin as we take up mindfulness practice, meditation practice, meditation of some kind, we start to realize that we're observing ourselves, right? The self-reflective capacity that we've had our whole lives takes on a different flavor because it isn't self-witnessing through the lens of ego. It isn't just self-criticism and self-condemnation and self-adjustment and, super ego and all that kind of stuff. We begin to learn to bear witness to our human experience from a different place. And we start to notice the thing people have noticed for, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of years. If I can observe something, I'm not it. I'm the subject. I'm not the object. And this, for a lot of us, turns into a spiritual question, a spiritual problem, spiritual endeavor pretty quickly, because everything that I imagine is me, I can observe. And so it starts to bring up some pretty significant questions. What am I really? Who am I really? Right? What is the nature of this? And of course, practice is designed to help us, especially in the Zen expression of contemplative experience, really encourages us to pull at those threads, ask those questions. Deconstructing the known is seen as liberative, right? And so the nation is destroyed. And we can talk about that in terms of a country, the rise and fall of the era of a ruling class or a nation or an empire or something like that. In the external world, of course, we understand that. But there's also, for a lot of us, an old way of seeing, an old way of being, an old way of understanding our lives. It starts to crumble, right? The nation of the ego, the nation of the understood, the nation of the safe, the nation of the known really does begin to fall apart. And yet we're assured mountains and rivers remain. And so, wow, Zazen starts to become a temple that we build on the mountain of the heart. And it starts to become a refuge, that we build on the banks of the river of the heart. Those mountains and those rivers are not falling. They can't fall. They're indestructible. I'm told that sound, once it's created, doesn't ever stop. It just goes out forever. We don't hear it. The waves get too small, but they don't, technically speaking, ever end. So once our heart beats, once you're born and you cry, you're here forever. You can't not be. It's quite a thing to sit quietly cross-legged, as we just did, and allow ourselves to feel that happening. Hear the sound of the inhalation, the affirmation of life one more time, the exhalation, the grace, the surrender of allowing it to disappear into the everything. It doesn't stop, right? So to do what you just did, to sit quietly for 20 minutes, half an hour, and listen and feel it happening. The mountains and rivers of your life, they'll never go anywhere. They can't. That's a profound thing. It reminds us where we should be living from. We don't try to live, at least not in this tradition, we don't try to live from the nation part of ourselves. We try to remind ourselves to live from the part that's deeper than that. We try to remind ourselves to live from the heart. That sounds trite. It's true, but it sounds trite. We try to live from that which is indestructible. We try to live from the mountains and the rivers that we become very intimate with, that we come to know well and trust through our meditation practice, through our practice of compassion and wisdom, right? That's what we're talking about today. Oh. In true Busho Dharma talk fashion, I've used half the time and I haven't started the talk yet. Oh well, I'm afflicted with distractibility. I'm convinced anybody who tells you that meditation is good for focus is lying. I think they're just probably trying to sell you a book or something. Anyway, here's the talk. In the long, hot autumn of 1996, I was living alone in a small, hot, one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an old brownstone building in South Minneapolis. I sat as close as I could to the open window without getting in the splash of sunlight. I put my bare feet up on the windowsill and I read a review for a record album released exactly 10 years previously in the year 1986 that I had never heard of. The album was called The Indestructible Beat of Soweto. And the review was by Robert Christgau. It read, in part, "This music thwarts apartheid's determination to deny Blacks not just a reasonable living, but a meaningful identity. The defiantly resilient and unsentimental exuberance of these musicians has to be fully absorbed before it can be believed, much less understood. They couldn't be more into it if they were inventing rock and roll." So in 1986, when Indestructible was released, the apartheid regime was still in power in South Africa, and the music on it came to us from the poorest of the poor Black townships. Christgau gave The Indestructible Beat of Soweto an A+, which is almost unheard of from him. He said it was the single most important album of the entire decade. I had never read such an impassioned review before, and although it was completely out of character and I had precisely zero disposable income, I was compelled to take a bus across Minneapolis to find a copy of that CD at a little independent record store called the Electric Fetus. You cannot reasonably wear out a CD, but I tried. I'd never heard music like that before. I didn't understand even one syllable of even one song, and it couldn't have mattered less. It shook my heart around inside of my chest for months, and it eventually reminded me of something humans can know, a truth so deep that we forget. The beat is indestructible. Just as a side note here, Soweto, Soweto, is a township. That's the word they use in South Africa. Some of you know that. In this country, we would probably say, I don't know what we would say, shanty town or ghetto or something. On the Soweto is on the outskirts of Johannesburg, the biggest city in South Africa. And Soweto is an acronym kind of for Southwestern Township, Soweto. It's famous for a lot of reasons. There's lots of townships, but it's famous because it's where Nelson Mandela and his neighbor, like less than 100 yards, is where Desmond Tutu, who turned out to be the Archbishop, lived. It's where both the future president and the Archbishop of the South African Anglican Church lived. Soweto. Spiritual practice, the religious life, exists because we need help remembering what really is. We are confused so easily and lost so easily. We misunderstand reality, and when we misunderstand, we suffer. When we suffer, we hurt each other. If we are very fortunate, at some point in our lives, we get shaken from our slumber in some way, and we are touched by something vast. When we see the size of the misunderstanding and the size of the awakening project, we are compelled to change our lives. The spiritual life is not a luxury, and the spiritual life is not a hobby. It is a human imperative if we are to survive. In our religious life, our Zen practice, for those of you who would label what you do that, can have the four qualities that Robert Christgau mentioned in his review of the Indestructible Beat of Soweto. Our practice can be defiant, resilient, unsentimental, and exuberant. Those are the four things I'm going to talk about. I'll probably just talk about maybe one of them today, and I'll probably talk about the three next time. But I'm talking about it today because your practice can save you, and it can help to save others, and the world needs saving desperately. And I don't mean save in the traditional sense. In a small sense. I don't mean it in egoic sense. I don't mean it in that way. I mean it in the bodhisattva vow sense, the much, much, much larger sense. The kind of saving that is already based on and rests on the awareness that the heart is already indestructible. The energetic heart, the mythical heart, the Buddha heart is already indestructible and already is the all. Our practice is then resting on the mountain, and it isn't resting in the nation. Does that make sense? It isn't in the field of that which comes into power and goes out of power, comes into efficacy, goes out of efficacy, is now experiencing shame, is now experiencing pride, is now experiencing fame, is now experiencing disrepute. It isn't vulnerable to the 8 worldly winds. It isn't vulnerable to the vicissitudes of the human experience. So the saving comes from a place of being already saved, which I know doesn't make sense to this organ, but it makes tremendous sense to this organ down here. All right, well, this is where zazen happens. And this is absolutely where the world is safe from. 100%. So I'm going to do a screen share here because I have next to me. Isn't that cool? This is my little, what do you call it? It's a plaque of the album cover that you can't see it, but that's where it goes on my wall. There's a space on my wall where I usually have that hanging. But I'm going to put up on the screen for you the album cover because I actually think there's something to be seen in it. There we go. Can you all see that? Interesting, isn't it? Just a snapshot taken of people in the township. A little rough around the edges. Very accepting of humanity. There's nothing posed about it. There's nothing planned about it. Nothing even pretty about it. And I hope, I'll get rid of that. I hope that you experience to some degree your zazen in the same way. A lot of us were given instructions, as well we should be given instructions on how to sit, how to place our bodies, the posture that we should assume, the way the bones are balanced, right? The imaginary cord in the back of the head that stretches up, and the tucking of the chin, and the placing of the tongue against the roof of the mouth, and the closing of the teeth, and the posture of the hands, and where the digits go to form the circle correctly, and all that kind of stuff. For those of you who really get into kind of the granular instructions, there's a reason that we do all of that stuff, but it's not performative. In other words, we create the posture so that we can experience it from the inside, so that we can experience it and take it. And we're adjusting, of course, our hearts. We're adjusting our minds. We're putting everything in accord. I'm lining up my body to be in the right relationship with itself. I'm not doing it so that the person across the room from me, the person across the Zendo can go, wow, look at that. Boy, he nailed it. Full lotus. Wow, imagine. And so from the inside, in the felt subjective experience of our zazen, it can start feeling pretty rough around the edges, even when we get all that stuff right. We get all of it right so that we can fully experience the parts of us that are not in alignment. Does that make sense? Right? The reason we have the ritual, the reason everything is organized, the reason it's the same way every day, the reason that the palms are placed together like this and not like this and all that kind of stuff is to show us the little places in ourselves that are not present, that are not in alignment. Not a judgment. It's just when we get really, really, really granular, it shows us the pieces that are a little rough around the edges. Like, oh, I wasn't there. I can feel that. I can feel how the shape changed during the. Oh, I could see how my thumb tip separated when my mind wandered. All that kind of stuff. Do you see it? Rough around the edges. Rough around the edges. Rough around the edges. Raw. Right? We devote ourselves. It's more than a want. We devote ourselves to. Oh, there's a part of me that gets lost and needs to come back again. There's a part of me that wants to come back home again. I can see when I'm living from the rough. I can see when I'm living from the empire. I can see when I'm living from my distracted nature. I can see when I'm living from my nation. To keep my ego, or to keep my metaphor going here, the metaphor of the ego, right? The nation. I can see. I put myself in a ritual space. The posture is a ritual space, right? I put myself in a ritual space so I can better bear witness, so I can more clearly see, so I can more lovingly embrace and relate to, set boundaries with, understand, feel, right? The parts of me that are rough around the edges, so that I can help discern what's the difference between anger that's clean burning, anger that says, no, this is not the nature of the world. This is not the nature of enlightenment. This is not the nature of love. This is not the nature of wisdom. This is no. And when that anger is tainted by something else, vengefulness, right? Can you feel fury, the desire to make something suffer? We can feel, right? How that becomes, ooh, there's something else going on there. right? In our practice, in that temple we build on the mountain of our heart, we get better at being able to discern these things, right? When are my impulses coming from my mountains and rivers? When are my impulses coming from something else? Organizing the body in that way, organizing the mind in that way really helps me. It really, really, really helps me. Wow. So I know I'm on the clock here. I want to talk about one of the four things and then I'll leave the other three. Defiance. Christgau said the music was defiant. Buddhism, the tradition of Buddhism from its very inception, at the very, very, very beginning, 500 BC, give or take 100 years, from its inception was a counterculture, quite self-consciously a counterculture. Not a counterculture that wasn't intended to be, but we now look back and go, oh, wow, that was a counterculture through the lens we now understand. No, it was self-consciously and actively in its time, based on what we understand, a counterculture, right? It was a rebellion from the very, very beginning, designed to be such, right? It was a gentle rebellion, a gentle defiance, of course. It was an understanding defiance. It was a very compassionate defiance, a very compassionate rebellion, but it was a rebellion nonetheless. When your family has a built-in system of, we're not going to talk about that thing because we're going to keep secrets, and you decide to talk about that thing because truth is more important, that's what we're talking about. That's a counterculture move, isn't it? Isn't that defiance? Isn't that rebellion? Not rebellion for the sake of it, not rebellion because you want power, not rebellion because you're wanting to tear something down and destroy. That comes from a place in you that just wants to shed light, to tell the truth, to bring something in, to know more, to heal. Will it upset the status quo? Will it upset the norm? Uh-huh. Yeah. You might even pay a price. You might even pay quite a price. But can you feel the place it's coming from? I'm touching my chest. You can feel where that's coming from. That's not coming from the empire. That's not coming from the nation. That's coming from the mountains and the rivers. It's coming from the indestructible part of you, the beat. This is a refusal to live by something that's untrue, a refusal to live by something that's unhelpful. Right? Literally, part of what we do when we sit is go, oh, I can see underneath that thought is a feeling. It's entwined with that thought. Underneath that feeling is a really deeply held karmic understanding, a belief, a conditioning, we say, conditioned and unconditioned, right? The nation is conditioned. The unconditioned is the heart, is the indestructible, right? We get quite good at seeing that going, oh, I've got a belief down there. I've got a meaning-making understanding that I got from my culture, from my family, from my nation. Oh my God, I can see it's untrue. I can see it's actually hurtful. Wow, that's part of our meditation practice. Say, oh, I have to stop. No, 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 no more. We're done. Can you set? Can you see it? It's like, no, no, we're done. That's not true. That's not a true thing. I'm going to replace what's untrue with what is true. I will not live from that place anymore. No, that's a defiance. That's a defiance. Again, not defiance to get attention. That doesn't have to be loud. It can be invisible. People in your life may never even know you did it. But the refusal to stay at the center of gravity of a given culture, to allow yourself to evolve past it. That's your vow. Talk about a defiance. I mean, of course, social standards. I'm going to live by a larger law. The bodhisattva vows. I'm going to live by the law of love. I'm going to live by the precepts. Those aren't culturally normative. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but what's culturally normative, it's pretty destructive. I vow not to kill. That is not the level that our culture lives at. I know you know that. I'm not talking just about the dead thing on your plate. I'm talking about, well, it depends on who we're killing and under what flag we're killing them. When you take a vow like I vow not to kill, yeah, it's going to affect your diet, but holy macaroni, that's going to affect the way you work in the world. What do you do when your rage shows up? Do you kill it? Wow. Right? This defiance starts becoming very, 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 very subtle. And all of it is done in the interest of truth. All of it's done in our deep devotion. our deep awareness of everything, every beat goes on forever. Every action goes on forever. This is the rule of karma. This is the law of interconnectedness. Choices have impact. I want to purify my desire. I want to live by the most loving place in me because it matters forever. Right? So from the very, very beginning, no, we're not going to do the caste system in Buddhism. From the very beginning of Buddhism, no, we're not going to do the caste system. We're going to let women into the culture. We're going to let the untouchables into the culture. We're going to let all 5 of the castes that were part of that thing at that time in. We're going to practice nonviolence in a very violent culture. We're going to have a completely different understanding of reward and punishment that repel karma. We're going to teach very different value systems. We're going to teach very, very, very different relationships to money, possessions, interactions, very different, very, very, very different definitions of speech. What loving action is, what loving lifestyle, and all that kind of stuff. Radical, still radical. You don't need me to tell you this because every time any of us reads religious scripture from any tradition, we go, wow, we're sure not there yet. How old is this thing? 4,000 years old? Oh, Upanishads. Wow, we're not there yet. What did Christ say? Love your enemy? He couldn't possibly have said that. Wow. No wonder they killed him. We're not even close. We've had 2,000 years to assimilate that one. Haven't even moved. Love your neighbor? No, God, we're not even there yet. We're not even on that one. Walk on the earth as if you were kissing it with your feet. They're all defiant at the beginning. Love is wildly defiant. And therefore, it's understood to be very, very dangerous. So I'm going to wrap up for now. There is more to talk about here. I do want to explore the next time. I really want to talk about practice zazen as being not only embodiments of our defiance against that which isn't loving, but I really want to explore the resiliency, the unsentimentality, which is a really, really big one. A lot of us kind of fall for sentimentality as kind of a spiritual bypass, and exuberance, the joy that comes with practice. I really want to talk on those things, but I think that's enough for now. I just wanted to get this started, and I thank you. Yeah. The nation is destroyed, mountains and rivers remain has been on my mind a lot, and South Africa has been on my mind and heart a lot lately, and so I kind of appreciate you indulging me a little bit and letting me wander into these landscapes. So next time we'll finish, but I appreciate your attention and I thank you. I'll turn off the recorder. See you next time.